Hi and welcome back to the second part of the Contemporary Workplace series of mini lectures. In this mini lecture, we describe organisations in today's workplace, and we describe what it means to be an organisation in today's workplace. So an organisation is defined as a collection of people that work together with a clear division of labour to achieve a common purpose. The idea is that an organisation should return value to society and meet the customer's needs in order to justify its continued existence. And what we tend to find is that organisations are enrolled in this cycle of continuous feedback in order to get and meet the needs of the customer. And that's called an open system. Okay, so an open system is where a variety of inputs are achieved from the environment. And what an organisation does is that it transforms that in some way in order to create the product or service outcome. Let's look at that in more detail. So the environment supplies the resource inputs. Now these can be people, money, materials, technology, or information. And then the organisation says, okay, I've got all of these resources. Now what I need to do is transform them. Now I can transform them in a multitude of ways. Now that includes how my structure is, what my environment internally looks like, how many people I have, where I get my resources from, whether I choose to send the transformation process overseas or have it here in Australia, what technology I use. So the transformation process is very broad. But once it's transformed, we then have outputs. Okay, so the finished output is either a good or a service. Okay, and the environment consumes that. And like I said, an organisation only exists if there's continued value for it in society. So consumer feedback is absolutely vital. And the feedback that we get is what informs how we get our resources. Okay, so if we're making a product and we're sourcing it from China and our customer says, look, it's not up to the value that I want it to be at, then what we do is we look at where our source comes from and then have a look at whether there's a different way in which we do that. Or we have a look at whether our internal organisational system is efficient. So we start to take on board the feedback in order to make a better product. And that's why it's an open system. But how do we know if organisations are actually performing, right? And we know this from the value that's created. Okay, so an organisation creates a good or a service, and that good or service has to be valued. And the value is created when the resources are used in the right way, at the right time, preferably at minimum cost, in order to create a high quality good or service. Now we can measure value, depending on how it's defined, in a multitude of ways. We can measure it in terms of the productivity of our workplace, so the quantity and quality of work performance that we have. We can measure it in terms of the performance effectiveness, so what our measure of task or goal accomplishment is. Or we can measure it in terms of performance efficiency, right? So how much cost was associated with getting that goal out there. But what we can find is that resources or outputs, what to say, can be effective, efficient, neither, or one or the other, right? So the preferable one depends on what value we're trying to achieve. Now, arguably, the gold standard is that the product or output that we are creating should be effective and efficient. So that means that our goals are achieved, our resources are put to good use, and there's high productivity. Our product can also be efficient but not effective. So we might be in a situation where we don't actually achieve the goal. However, we don't have any wasted resources. Now that's not ideal either. We could be effective but not efficient, in which we achieve our goal and have a product. However, we have a lot of wasted resource in the process, and that's not efficient in order to get our competitive advantage, right? Or we could be in a situation where we're neither efficient or effective. Now, this would result in absolutely no product being achieved on time and a lot of resources wasted. So that's obviously the situation we don't want to be in. But what we need to do as managers is find a way, and we talk about this over the course of the semester or trimester, in order to be effective and efficient. And that's where your role as a manager comes in. In order to work within today's society, what we tend to find is that there are a lot of transitions that are happening. So there's this preeminence of technology that exists. You can think about Coles and Woolworths, for example. 5-10 years ago, they didn't have self-checkouts, right? And now they're trying to push you to go through those self-checkouts by having minimum open checkouts with people on it. Now, while there are still people that use those checkouts, what they're also trying to work on in terms of their technology is how to scan the entire trolley without you needing to pull things out. Now think about it. If this is making the organisation more efficient, because arguably it would be by reducing costs of labour, will it result in wasted resources or lost resources in the process, right? Or alternatively, if this technology cannot actually find a way to exist in society for another 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, how is those wasted resources being accounted for? Regardless, what we're tending to find is that the way in which an organisation operates in society today have a variety of flow-on effects. Okay, so we've got premise of technology as something we need to consider as managers and as organisations. We also have this demise of command and control. Previously, our organisation was run by predominantly a bureaucratic system. However, what we're finding is that other systems are taking over in some instances. So we've got this demise of command and control that exists. There's this increased focus on speed. So what we're expecting as consumers is a quick turnaround of products. So if you broke your phone, you smashed your screen, you go into a shop and you say, I need you to fix it, and they say, come back a day later, you all go, oh my gosh, I can't come back a day later because what am I going to do without my phone? So there's this increased expectation that people will do and work faster for you. So if you go into a shop now, they'll say, yeah, that's fine. However, I'll come back in a couple of hours and I'll have it done. All right? There's also this embracement of networking, right? And we actually see in each industry their own little bodies coming together in order to talk to each other because we're in a networked economy, right? Things are getting done more now by who you know than what you know. And unfortunately, that's the situation. Well, fortunately for some, that's the situation that we are living in. And as a result, we need to start looking at how we embed that within our organizations. As a manager, how do you get on those boards? How do you get on those networks? And how do you manage your career by having those networks? There's also this belief in empowerment. So beforehand, there was this resistance to giving other people some sort of leverage within an organization. So as a manager, I need to tightly control everything I do and do everything. Whereas now what we're asking them to do as managers, what you will find that you'll need to do is actually disseminate your work amongst your team. So you need to empower others to do their job and your job in order to be effective. There's this emphasis on teamwork that is new. What we tend to find is that in organizations, particularly if you think about Valve. So Valve is a gaming company, and what they've done is actually demolish all organizational teams, so to speak, and actually put together teams based on the product in which they're actually producing at the time. So you may be working for one team in one organization output and another for another organizational output, so another game, for example. But there's this emphasis that together we need to make the product, not separately. And there's this increasing concern that we have for work-life balance, which kind of goes against what we're actually saying in terms of saying we want 24-hour operations, but we also want work-life balance. So managers are starting and organizations are really starting to unpack what that means. There's this increase in resilience training and mental health training because that's coming up as a contemporary issue in management that we need to think about. But what we tend to find is that in the future, this concern for work-life balance isn't going away, right? So how do we manage that? So let's take a look at these two people. So we've got Wayne Bennett, who's our CEO, and we've got Alison Watkins, who's the CEO. So Wayne Bennett is a coach, Alison Watkins is the CEO. And the question then becomes, who are managers and what do they do? Why is it that a CEO is asked to do the same thing that a coach is doing, but at an obviously different level? So let's unpack that. So managers are people in organizations who directly support and help activate the work efforts and performance accomplishment of others. So your job as a manager is to help motivate other people to do their job, right? Your job is to manage others. So the top managers in the field actually guide the performance of the organization as a whole. And their common job titles are Chief Executive Officer, Chief Operating Officer, Managing Director, and Director. Right, so they're the people that sit at the top of the organization and say, I am responsible for what happens in this organization. I have a legal responsibility and I can go to jail for what actually happens at the lower levels of the organization. So if there's someone committing fraud down the bottom and I should have known about it through a process, I'm the one going to jail, they're going to get a fine, right? So if you are going to be a top manager, your job is to try to manage how we encourage others to do the right thing, right? So, true high-performing organizations value people as their strategic assets, right? And the managers are the people in which enact that value. So a top manager is one in which that needs to believe in it the most, right? So if a top manager knows that the people are its core assets, they need to train the managers at the middle levels to be able to empower their bottom level employees or their frontline employees. So that's who managers are. But there's different levels of managers, right? So it's more than a supervisor. A manager could be a middle manager, right? So they could oversee the large departments or divisions. They could be project managers, which coordinate complex projects. They could be team leaders, or supervisors that report to middle managers and directly supervise non-managerial workers. So non-managerial workers are your frontline employees, okay? There's also different types of managers. So line managers are those that contribute to the production of basic goods or services. So for example, in Coles, you've got your bakery manager, you've got your deli manager, you've got your customer service manager. They're our line managers, okay? So they have an actual good or service that they have to oversee, and they go and do that. Staff managers are those with technical expertise to advise and support line managers. So in that circumstance, staff managers may be the department, the store manager, for example. A functional manager are the ones that are responsible for one area. So they may be the financial manager or the marketing manager or the sales manager. And what they tend to do is actually look at a function. And general managers are those that are actually overseeing really complex units and they go across multiple areas. And then there's administrators. And administrators work for public or not-for-profit organizations, and what they tend to do is oversee everything, okay? So not all of these types of managers are going to exist in every company. But they do have different titles, and it's important for you to understand the different titles because ultimately, when you're within an organization, you need to know who you report to and who they report to and then who they report to above. Every manager has this requirement to be accountable. And the accountability requirement is basically to show that the performance results to a supervisor. Okay, so basically say, I am accountable for the deli department and my deli department is efficient and effective in these ways. I do reports, I check in with my staff, I know that they're happy, I'm not recruiting or I am recruiting if I need to, and these are the things that are happening in my department. Okay? There's also this expectation that a managerial performance will be judged on the quality of work life that exists within their department or their area. And the quality of work life is really this new thing that comes about by saying the overall quality of the human experience in the workplace should determine whether or not I am a good manager, right? Because if people don't interact or I'm in a toxic environment, there's lots of bullying, harassment, then that doesn't show that you're the one that's a great leader or a great manager in this case. What it shows is that something's going wrong and somewhere we need to investigate because toxic environments impact performance. And if our job is to transform inputs into outputs, then understanding how that's going to be more effective or efficient is part of my job to measure whether or not you're the right manager for me. So we talk about organizations as an upside down pyramid, okay? And this has come about because in organizations, what we tend to find is that customers tell us what we're supposed to do, right? So customers and clients start at the top, and then we work our way down the list, whereas top managers are actually on the bottom because what they're doing is supporting the pyramid in order to get what people want out there, right? So there's lots of workers, operational workers that support the customer expectation, and underneath that you've got team leaders and managers. So top managers are really the pinnacle support for the team leaders and managers in order to support the operational workers, which in order to support the customers and what they want at the end. All right, so that is what an organisation is, and that is how we enact organisations within organisations today. As complicated as that sounds, I hope this mini lecture has provided you with some insight into what it means to be an organisation today. In our next mini lecture, we'll be starting to define the management process. So stick around.